Standing up in McKinney. This is, according to Callus, coming to you with episode 729. It is the 10th of March, the year of our Lord, 2025. And as they say, beware the Ides of March. Today, we're going to talk about government education. I know some of you are probably thinking, Callus, you've done that more than once. Well, that's true, but I've got a little twist on it and something additional that just needs to be said. So if you'll bear with me, please join me. Until we get there, as a final reminder, final for today at least, the biggest thing you can do to help me make a difference, continue to grow the podcast, and be heard is to like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on the social media of your choice. The podcast can be heard. Google, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon, TuneIn, and I don't know, Stitcher and a couple others. Can't think of off the top of my head. One of these days I'll actually write them all down. And, on the social media side, I have a page and a group over at Facebook. I'm a pro at Gab. I drop in at MeWe and, occasionally even show up at Twitter or Instagram. So if you're feeling particularly motivated, right, you're feeling froggy, if you will, do me a real solid and go and rate and or review, perhaps both, the show. Every little bit you do makes a difference. The shadow ban is real. It is an effect, but we're just going to keep doing what we need to do. All right, here we go. On with the show. All right, so as you may have heard, the Department of Education is on the chopping block. I don't know whether DOJ is going to get it or the Secretary of Education first, but they may finally do what was promised all the way back in 1980. Do away with the Department of Education. Now, we could, forget it. I'm going to take a couple minutes. I'm going to explain. First of all, the federal government really has no authority, constitutional or otherwise, to be involved in education. Two, the reason that the federal government got involved in education was by what I would just say were not really that good of actors. And by actors, I mean individuals or organizations. Among them, John Dewey, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. And with Carnegie and Rockefeller, they were great businessmen, but they really had their own kind of twisted way of thinking about we the people. So that being said, and there was other people involved in this whole situation. And their reforms, their actions grew into what eventually became a Department of Education. But there was always something that was before that. It just wasn't as official and didn't have as much money behind it. Now, in theory, the states should have final control and say over any and all education within their boundaries. You could make an argument that you would like it to be more uniform, that, the argument's always been, well, Alabama cares less about their educational system than Connecticut. Well, that may be true. I don't know that the numbers necessarily would justify that out, but it may be true. But we're dealing with two entirely different regions, two significantly different cultures, and quite frankly, different priorities. So it shouldn't really be as a surprise that one state invests more or thinks more about government education. So setting that aside, the real question is, have the schools been doing better? Have the outcomes improved? Have we seen an upward trajectory since the federal government instituted the Department of Education? Now, if you talk to anybody that's honest, they will tell you no. Now, they might have different reasons or different excuses as to why that's the case, but they undoubtedly will have to admit, no, things have not gotten better. And to be fair, we could say some of that is because probably upwards of 10% of our country isn't really part of our country. Some have said maybe as high as 20% of our country. I just sincerely hope that's not the case. But even if we split the difference, 15% of the country isn't really part of our country, meaning the population. Okay, I mean, and again, because I'm not trying to be inflammatory, we're going to set that aside. We're just going to assume that that happens everywhere, and that's, a statistical issue. But with just the natural born, locally sourced people, have we been doing better since the Department of Education was created? And the evidence, all of the evidence suggests no. In fact, things have gotten worse. And if we look at the statewide way of dealing with this issue, I would suggest that the vast majority of the states have not done any better. In fact, I would suggest that if we were to do an honest evaluation, we would have to admit that we are underserving our students. We are underserving our families. We are working backwards. Now, the real problem for me is I believe the vast majority of what goes on in government education is on purpose. It was by design. It's not, in fact, failing. It is actually being successful in what its unstated real terms for existence were. What do I mean by that? If you go back to the earliest, advocates for state-run education, whether it's Horace Mann or John Dewey, they all believed that the children needed to be molded. They utilized the Prussian system, and the Prussian system was largely designed to give Prussia, aka Germany, better soldiers. The United States was looking for better factory workers. And to that end, they did a good job of producing factory workers. Now, you're always going to have, we'll just say, the upper third of intelligence or initiative or however you want to classify it. And they created special things to assist those folks because you're always going to need managers. You're always going to need people to do certain management things and develop those management skills. And then, of course, there's the elite, whether it's 1 to 5%, don't know, don't care. It just all works out the same. They lump us all together. They treat us all like, cogs in the machine. And that's what we end up with. So, again, I have to be willing to separate my personal thoughts, my objective analysis that I've just given you. And if you don't believe me, go look up John Taylor Gatto. He does probably an infinitely better job of explaining how all this works. But it's going to take a little bit longer. I'm just trying to cut to the chase here. All right. So I look at it this way. We spend more per capita or per student. And by we, I mean the United States, even on average, across all 50 states, spend more than pretty much every other country out there. And we have poor results to show for it. And then in the state of Texas, we spend an enormous amount of money on average over the entire state average. Keeping in mind there are large swaths of the state that just don't have the money that North Texas or Houston or San Antonio or, well, maybe not San Antonio, but Austin, Montgomery County. There are large swaths of the state that don't have the money that those areas do, particularly Collin County where I live. But we spend a lot of money. And we're just not getting the results that we ought to get. Now, there are some that would want to blame the state for that, right? Well, those same people that are blaming the state were behind instituting Robin Hood, which took money from some counties and divvied it up and sent it elsewhere because the state, thought it was necessary to level things out. And now that the state's saying, maybe we're just going to reduce the amount of money we're actually going to give you. The panic is set in, right? It's never enough money. Now, if you're spending, $4,000 a year per student, okay, maybe you can make an argument that you're underfunded. When you're spending $10,000 a year per student, I'm kind of guessing you should have more than enough money. But there's a whole lot of schools that are spending a whole lot more money than that. And the question is what are you getting for that money? Now, I will be the first to say that there are some misplaced priorities, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I really think what it is it's a grand deception. The grand deception is this. We have a district. The district spends X amount of money, and your students aren't doing as well as you think they ought to do as you put them in the government school in the first place. So you demand action. You demand accountability. You demand improvements. So you have more money taken from you and given to the district. And the district, rather than investing in teachers, teachers' aides, different equipment to help the students learn better, they go out and hire more administrative staff. Now, if you doubt me on this, just go look at the bar graphs. You can see how high the administrative staff has gone in comparison to the amount of students or the amount of teachers. Now, granted, some of this has to do with compliance, right? If you want this money from the state or if you want this money from the feds, you have to do all these things in order to comply with their rules. So you're forced to go hire staff to comply with the rules in order to get that little bit of money. And I've talked about this before. You really net out a minor amount of money after all is said and done, and you had to spend to comply. And then you have to deal with the fact that if you've invested in, let's say, new spaces or new buildings, that there's additional maintenance and whatever else that is related to that, or just cost to operate it over and above the maintenance. So you're taking on I think they call it M&O, maintenance and operations. It really doesn't matter. There's a lot of extra costs built into that. So they deceive the public that they don't have enough money, but really it's an allocation issue, in my opinion. They convince you, the parents, right, the customers, that you don't really know what you want, that they know what's best for you and your children, and you must submit and not question what they're doing. And if you get a little, uppity, if you'll excuse the term, and show up to question or protest, then you're terrible. I mean, in some cases, they send the FBI after you. Not really feeling the representative government in play there. They deceive you and trick you into thinking that you're getting something that you're paying for, when in fact you're not really paying for it, nor are you receiving it. Because there's a whole lot of other people paying for your little Johnny or your little Mary to get the so-called education, aka indoctrination. The second part of this is there are legitimate poor outcomes. Now, you would think that if you have poor outcomes or declining enrollment or any number of what I would call key performance indicators, KPIs for those of you out there who actually have to deal in business, you would see a declining enrollment as a problem. You would say underutilization of properties as a problem. You would see underperforming on standardized tests, whether you love them or not, but that underperformance is a problem. You need to know what's going on there. But again, if you question any of those things, you're the bad guy. You're the problem. How dare you? Going back into the grand deception, right? We must do everything that we're doing, and you must not question us. There we go. They got you in the loop. Because the reality is it's never enough money. I suppose if we were to spend, let's say $100,000 per student per year, we would expect that we would have the top 2% across the board on everything. Well, one, that's not possible. And two, is that really a fair expectation? I mean, if you consider students on a bell curve, you're going to have your top percentage and your lower percentage, but a whole lot of people are in the middle. Now, maybe you can bump that middle section over a point or two or a percentage or two, but is it really a realized expectation that you can move all those people over? And then there's the issue of grade inflation, right? Because there's a whole lot of people that are concerned about little Mary Sue and little Johnny Be Good and whether or not they're getting their A, or at the very least a B. Anything less than that's failure, don't you know? And that's indicative on how bad the schools are doing. So, well, now we just make it easier to pass. Now, whether we make the test easier or we don't grade as hard, that's what we're dealing with. And again, you can't question, you can't look into it. And quite frankly, if you try and visit your school unannounced, you'll notice it's a lot like a prison. It's designed to keep the students in and the parents out. Now, they can say it's for safety. They can say it's for legitimate concerns, and, that can all be true. But let's not fool ourselves. They're really not comfortable with we as parents showing up, or we as parents showing up without their permission ahead of time. It reminds me of the people that say they went to Cuba to check things out, or they went to Venezuela, and we went and visited and how great it was. Well, yes, if you've given a guided tour at the best, most upkept places, of course you're going to come away thinking that, yeah, it's really not that bad here. It's nice. They really take care of their people. But that's not reality. It reminds me of my brief time in the Navy, and we would be told the Admiral was coming. So we had to make the whole ship shape, shine everything up, dust everything down, and just go on and on and on about all the things that had to be done for the Admiral, who, if he would show up, would be there all of about 30 seconds, and really and truly would never step further than, the quarterdeck. He might go to the captain's quarters or the bridge. Very rarely would an admiral risk getting dirty going down to the engine room or the boilers. Just saying. And I'm not saying that to be mean or speaking out of place here. It's just kind of a reality. Would you really expect that? He might check in with the officers, and also officers are going to tell him, oh, everything's great, everything looks good. Because they're not going to allow themselves to be put in a position where they look bad or they make their captain look bad. Same thing with the school district. The superintendent's job is to make everybody think that it's great. All the principal's job is to keep the superintendent happy and off of their case by telling him everything's great. All the teachers have a vested interest in convincing the principal that everything is great. Meanwhile, the parents, the people that get stuck footing the bill, are locked out, don't really have any chance to input, and quite frankly, nobody cares. Now, I want to be true and fair on this. There are people that get involved in the parent-teacher organizations or the parent-teacher association, and there are a whole lot of volunteer parents. I liken a lot of those people to the people that went on the tour of Cuba or Venezuela, or perhaps even an admiral. They're shown the best of the best. They're kept in the best places. They're shown exactly what they want them to see. Not always, not all the time, of course. I'm just being very general here, because they're trying to protect what they have, right? Everybody circles around to protect their territory. If you look at each school as a fiefdom and the district as the kingdom, they're defending what they have. Now, again, if you have declining enrollment and you've lost enough students, at what point does it become reasonable to think, maybe we ought to shut down this school? Or sell it? Or let's temporarily close it on the thought process that because of the people moving in, we might in fact have more students at some point in the future. Maybe it's 2 years out or 5 years out. We could spend that time renovating or doing some different things with the building in the meantime, because we don't really need the building to do what it's doing already, because we're underutilizing our facilities. But that would be honest, and you can't do that. And you can never ever shrink because, that's a failure. Bureaucracy sees anything being more efficient as a failure. It just does. The reward is in how big is your turf, right? It's just the way it rolls. So when I look at this, and I'm willing to set aside my personal opinion, i.e. that government indoctrination camps, aka public schools, are in fact doing the job they were designed to do. When I set aside the fact that, there are some students that really have no business in the schools in the first place, it still doesn't leave for a really good picture or a really good outcome out of those schools. So the parents, rightfully so, are thinking to themselves, what other options do we have? Now, parents that have money will go into private schools. Parents that maybe have some money, but more often than not have the flexibility, will go to homeschool or some kind of we'll call it a co-op, right? A university style school where they're going part-time to the school and the rest they do at home because they can. I mean, these are options. And, there are a lot of people that feel bad, right? Well, why should poor people, why should people that don't have as much money not be able to take advantage of these things? So their solution is to take that government money and reappropriate it to them. Now, naturally, the government school employees union, or quote association, and all the management of the government schools are up in arms about this. Oh, it's a disaster. It's the end of public schools as we've known it. We're not going to be able to exist without all that extra money from you. Well, it may be true. I'm not sure I believe it, but it may be true. So let me ask you something. Wouldn't it be necessary for you to be successful in order to justify keeping your job? I mean, I don't know about you, but in the private sector, if you fail to deliver, you're sent packing. I mean, even in the best of times, they look for the best employees. And when it's bad, I mean, sometimes you have to make cuts that you don't even want to take just to keep it functional. They don't have that problem with government schools because they can always take more government money. So let me ask you, if you've got your kid in a private school, or you want your children in a private school, would you really want more government involvement? I mean, the whole purpose of leaving government schools is to get away from government. Why in the world would you involve government or invite government in? Which is what a voucher program is, by the way. You can say there's no strings attached, there's no requirements, but that's now. Just wait until they got you on that sweet government money there. Things will change. And again, if you're a homeschooler, I'm sorry. I mean, I did not homeschool my children. That's one of the options I did not ever exercise. And I wish to be to a point at some point in the future that I can homeschool my grandchildren, or if I live long enough, my great-grandchildren. I would love to be able to do that. But in no way do I expect to get a tax credit. Now, in a perfect world, yes. But in the current situation, no. No. You're going to take my money under the guise of property tax, and you're going to spend it on education, and I've just written that off. I don't like it. I'm going to fight to reduce it as much as I can, but I understand that's the way it is. What fool would you be to go ask government to give me a little money back because, well, I'm not taking advantage of that school, so I want a voucher. Oh, well, in order to be eligible for this voucher, you have to meet these criteria. You have to do these things. You have to use this curriculum. You must pass this test. Doesn't that defeat the entire purpose of separating from the government schools in the first place? Let me ask you something. Do you think government vouchers, aka government money, aka tax money, aka your money, that they should take more of it to give it to other people? Do you think that's a good option? Do you think that's going to give you a better net outcome? I would suggest to you that you be very wise on where you go with that. You be very wise on whether or not you think that's a great idea. Because let me tell you, just because they give you this false bill of goods right now doesn't mean it's going to always be that way. I mean, I've talked about the idea of bait and switch off and on a little bit, and I really think that any government money that goes to private education is just that. You know, they say the camel's nose under the edge of the tent. Okay, maybe you like that analogy better. Maybe liken it to opening Pandora's box, maybe. But again, the entire reason that you went the track of private school, Christian school, something that is non-governmental school or homeschool, is to get away from government. Why in the world would you offer them an entry back in? Why would you expect them to not try and control and mandate? Because that's what bureaucracy does. That's what government does. So, you know what? The governor's probably going to get some form of school choice passed. And to be honest, there are a whole lot of parents that are in a bad situation where their government schools are absolutely terrible. And they want to go to a private school or some other version of school that already takes government money. Well, that might be what's best for them. And I don't begrudge them that. Maybe that is the best outcome they can hope for. And I wouldn't hate somebody. That's bad. I wouldn't hate that idea of somebody taking advantage of that. That's sorry. I can get that. I respect that to a degree. I mean, there are certain neighborhoods or school districts that I absolutely would not want to have my kids in. So I can get that. But I got to tell you, if you've got your kids in a Christian school, a private Christian school, or you're homeschooling, you're just asking for trouble. You're just trolling for problems by taking that government money. Now, if somebody wants to go to the school down the road that's just, I don't know, what do they call those? The international schools? There's no religious element there. There's all they want is quote unquote high achievers there. Okay, that's fine. That's great. You want to take your sweet, sweet government money that you took from somebody else? Because remember, where does tax money come from? That's right. You and I. And how do they collect that taxpayer money? That's right. Under threat of violence at the point of a gun. That's not an original quote, by the way. But property tax is just that. Somebody telling you, give us the money or else. So I want you to just be very, very careful. I'm not a big fan of the school choice for a number of different reasons. I'm quite confident we're going to get something, whether we want it or not. I would like to reassure people there's no reason to panic. Just don't take the money. Don't fall into the trap. Don't get caught up that they're going to do you any favors, because they won't. And the rest of the government school naysayers, if you really want to compete, if you want to really do a good job, do it. Just do it. Show us how it's done. You have near unlimited money or access to near unlimited money. You just got to be willing to spend it wisely, invest it properly. Again, in my own hometown, our superintendent that we have, who, by the way, makes just less than just less than $1,000 a day. That's calendar day. That's not even work day. $330-some thousand plus benefits, by the way. Now, when he took the job, it was my understanding he had one assistant superintendent. He might have had two. So we're just going to be generous and say he had two assistant superintendents. And I'm going to just speculate those assistant superintendents make low six-figure incomes. We're just going to say they're making between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. And he determined within the first year of taking the role, where he replaced a guy that had been doing it for quite some time and had actually earned that paycheck through time in the role, whether or not you can justify paying a superintendent $1,000 per calendar day. Be that as it may, that's what you're paying the guy. He decided that not two assistant superintendents was enough. No. He needed 4 assistant superintendents. So he doubled the amount of money on the top end of the administration. Now, the school budget cuts came out this year, right? And they looked at how are we going to save money in the school district. Now, in my mind, the first thing you do is cut out the 2 biggest salaries that you can do without. Maybe 3. Again, you have a superintendent and 4 assistant superintendents, 3 of which may have not even existed 2 years ago. Those would be the first things to cut because you want to keep your staff. You want to keep the people there that actually do the work. In nowhere. Okay, I'm going to use the analogy again. You're on a Navy ship. You've got your captain, your XO, your department heads, division officers. You're going to need those people. But if you have a couple of extra division officers underneath the department head, because the department head, in theory, can do the work of the division officers, right? So if you don't have a department head, the division officers can typically do what the department head would be. So if you're going to lose somebody, you're going to want to lose a department head in theory, or a division officer, or perhaps two in theory, rather than 30% of your workforce down in the main engine room. Just saying. And if you think that's a bit much, fine, 10%. You don't want to cut 10% of your workforce in the main engine room. Not a good option. But again, people, and again, that's just on a Navy ship, and yes, it's not a clean analogy. I'm not saying it is. If you ask any captain or XO, they would never want to give up a department head or a division officer. But if the trade-off is, I give up a division officer, but I get to keep an extra 6 guys down in the engine room, yeah, I think they're going to take it all day long. You know, as much as we all like to make fun of the deck department when I was in the engineering department, we also realized they did an important and valuable job, and we need them there to do that job. Now, I would imagine anybody below a principal totally gets the fact that they can't do their job without a custodian. They can't do the job without the bus drivers, without the lunch ladies, or lunch attendants, whatever the proper term is now, or their assistants. They would much rather give up one of those assistant superintendents or assistant principals. I mean, answer me this. Why in the world does a high school that has less than 3,000 students, or let's just say this, why in the world does a high school that has less than 4,000 students need 4 assistant principals and a ton of other staff? I went to high school. We had 3,300 students when I went to high school. We had 1 assistant principal. Actually, take it back. We had 2. We had 2 assistant principals. We were able to function just fine. How do I know? Because I spent a lot of time in that assistant principal's office. But I'm just going to tell you, they were more than capable of running that entire school. It's crazy to me. And they probably didn't make but a fraction of what an assistant principal makes these days. Just saying. All right. Again, 3 key points here. There's a grand deception of what's going on within the school district. That's 1. 2, we've got poor outcomes that they can't justify and they're not fixing. And 3, it's never enough money. Perhaps if they did some things differently, perhaps if they revised how they spent the money or where they spent the money, it would make a difference. But otherwise, it's just never enough money. We just need to accept that fact. That leads you one choice. Get out of the government schools. Just get out. Accept the fact they're going to take the money. Accept the fact that you really can't do anything about it, and just get your kids out. It's what's best for them, what's best for you, and quite frankly, probably what's best for society in the long run, in my opinion. And because this is called According to Callus, I need to remind you, this is always my opinion, my understanding of things. And I don't claim to be perfect. I don't claim to know everything. But it's right there in front of you. With that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.
Wanted. Young men to rebuild Western civilization. Must be unafraid of pain, blisters, intellectual rigor, and a lifetime of long shifts with swords and shovels, digging ditches, repelling invaders, and reading stacks of books taller than their fathers. Must be impervious to manipulative women of all sorts, giggling virgins, cyber skanks, and even full cauldrons of Karens or hand-wringing clergy, but always seeking to hear and heed the words of Lady Wisdom. Immune to the leadership of hypocrites and LARPing online masculinitods, unaffected by abusive authorities, petty professors, and all brokers of official respectability. Willing to hoist the Jolly Roger and Johnny Cash's favorite finger whenever faced with idolatry. Long-suffering joy and determination required. Must be willing to dwell among the tombs and graves of the long dead, seeking truths that cannot die. Exhaustion guaranteed. Conflict guaranteed. Mortality guaranteed. New St. Andrews College. Liberal arts for the undaunted.